Well, it gives me a very great pleasure, Joan, to welcome you to Mystics and Scientists. This is a very important time, I think, in the development of medicine. I think there are a number of my colleagues who recognize that science is going to have to change, although the vast majority are looking for changes in the direction that I'm not sure they're going to come from. There will certainly be discoveries of new molecules, and there will certainly be an extension of our understanding in the neurochemistry of the brain and the way the brain is put together. But as soon as you come to questions of consciousness, then we altogether leave neuroscience as it is at the moment and come into a totally different field. And it may amaze you all to know that there is as yet not one theory as to how neural processes become conscious. It is an astonishing lack of a theoretical framework for that everyday event that comes to our attention when we open our eyes in the morning. I can't think of a better person than Joan to give us the talk on healing today. Joan went to Harvard Medical School, where she got her doctorate, and then she did 3 postdoctoral fellowships. And if you see the range of her postdoctoral fellowships, I think you'll understand the special qualities which she brings to her Ministry of Healing. She did a postdoctoral fellowship in cancer, and one in psychoneuroimmunology, and the other in mind-body healing. A most impressive range of training before she went out into the world to, first of all, practice, and then to set up her own teaching seminars, which she does now. I asked Joan if she still saw people, and she says no, she doesn't, but what she does is teach. And I think this is enormously important, because the new area, which is the development of mind, body and soul, and the relationship of these to each other, I think is enormously important. She's written some wonderful books. You can get The Power of the Mind to Heal up at the desk. And the titles of Joan's books, I think, are very creative in themselves. Minding the Body, Mending the Mind. Or what about Guilt is the Teacher, Love is the Lesson? You can read the other titles on the sheet, but I think that is a simply splendid one. So, Joan, it's a very great pleasure to have you at Mystics and Scientists, and we look forward to Fire in the Soul, the Energy of Healing.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. And I'd like to start with a personal story about why I got interested in healing in the first place. I think many times if you ask personal questions of people who are in the healing arts, whether they're therapists or physicians or nurses or energy healers, they'll tell you that they had some personal story or personal experience that led them to what they're doing. And that many of you here probably fall into that category of wounded healers of one sort or another. For me, that experience happened when I was 10 years old. I lived in a suburb of Boston and was a perfectly normal little 10-year-old. And one day I saw a movie that was very frightening. This is another subject about frightening movies for children and how they're not a good thing. But I started to dream the movie, which took place in a jungle. It was about headhunters and snakes and scorpions and other worlds. And the difficulty was that pretty soon I couldn't tell when I was dreaming from when I was awake. And this is called being psychotic. So I would see headhunters at the window and imagine that poison darts were being shot at me. Got sent home from school when 2 red marks on my arm. I went to the nurse. I said, I've been hit by headhunters. And if you ever want to get sent home from school, this will do it every time. And it got progressively worse. But you see, the mind is quite an extraordinary place. And I developed a second compensatory mental illness to deal with psychosis. It's called obsessive-compulsive disorder. And in fact, one of the theories of that is that it's a compensatory mental illness that helps organize a disorganized experience. And in that, it consists of a set of rituals, ritual behaviors that are accompanied by obsessive thoughts. And my obsessive thinking was that unless I did these rituals, those headhunters would kill my parents and kill my brother, so that the world was dependent on me. And a set of rituals that got longer every day, including things like all of my reading had to be done upside down, backwards, and repeated 3 times without interruption. So it gets like book reports were very difficult to do. Math problems in school, same thing. I had to erase them all 3 times before I would put them down. Then there were hand-washing rituals, mouth-scraping rituals, eating rituals, all kinds of things. Pretty soon, I had to drop out of school because my entire life was just made up of rituals and terror. As I can't even begin to describe to you the terror that accompanied this. The thought that I was the only one who could see what was just barely hanging in the unmanifest world about to break through the veil and disrupt this world. And it was just awful. Excuse me. What happened to me is that my mother took me to a psychiatrist, and very fortunately she didn't like him. This was a very good thing, because he said, it must be all your fault. This wouldn't happen to your child. If you only let her cross the street, she would be fine. And my mother knew this was not a good diagnosis, so I never went back again. And it's fortunate, because I probably would have been put on Haldol and ended up in a back ward somewhere and still have been there. As it was, I had a spontaneous remission, a spontaneous healing, which fueled all of my lifelong interest in healing, spontaneous remission, the nature of the mind and molecules. And what happened was this. I was sitting in my usual state of fear and terror in the living room one day, and I believe I had actually prayed. And all of a sudden, the world shifted, as it does when you move from one level of consciousness to another, and you feel that shift. You feel it in the cells of your body. You feel it in the energy of your body. And instead of being in a state of fear and isolation, I felt myself in connectedness with everything. And where before there had been terror, there was complete peace, safety, and a sense that the world was unfolding just as it should have been. That sense of perfection that accompanies sometimes a near-death or a mystical experience. The sense that we, of course, have no words for in English. We would call this, in Sanskrit, the sense of purna, perfection, the wholeness, everything. And in that state, of course, you know things that you don't usually know. You move out of the state of limited knowledge into the state of unlimited wisdom. And in that state of wisdom, it was very clear to me that I had a choice, that I could remain mentally ill or through an enormous act of will, but I knew I wouldn't be alone in the act of will. An enormous act of will, I could actually bring myself out of it. And so I agreed with Spirit that I would do this. And I was told that I must never do another ritual again, and even one more and I would stay stuck in that place forever. And then the fear began again, because I thought, how could I not do another ritual when the lives of everybody seemed dependent on it? And at that point, a poem came into my 10-year-old mind, and this was the poem. Somewhere in the darkest night, there always shines a little light. This light up in the heavens shines to help our God watch over us. When a small child is born, the light her soul does adorn. So when our only human eyes look up in the lightless skies, we must know, even though we cannot see, that this light burns far into the night to help our God watch over us. So I wrote the poem down, and as the words came through me, they had the power to bring me back out of the state of isolation and fear and back into the state of union and connectedness. And I knew what I had to do. Over the next couple of days, every time I would enter the fear and need to do a ritual, I would recite the poem instead, and it would bring me back to unity. And in a period of a couple of days, the entire mental illness vanished. And, of course, this is what I would have to tell you, if I put on my medical or psychological hat, was a spontaneous healing. Although, like anybody who's had a spontaneous healing, if you elicit their story, it's never spontaneous at all. There are always certain elements that are recognizable in the story. And so at 10, that really set me up for my life's work, because the questions that came out of that, questions that I must admit to you I still have no answers for, or a few answers for, were, first of all, what was the spiritual experience? What happened? And this I started to explore right away, much to the chagrin of my Jewish mother, who would find all kinds of odd things in the mailbox from the Unitarian Fellowship and, books on yoga and meditation, like what is a nice Jewish girl doing studying these things. And then what I was really interested in was the neuroscience of it all. What could have happened in the brain of a young girl to cause that kind of hallucinatory activity? And what happened in order to reverse it? And I still don't know the answer to that. I have a feeling it was something that went on in my right temporal lobe, and that's about as much as I can pinpoint it, and maybe something that went on in the frontal lobes of my brain. It's been said by neuroscientists if we could localize God, God would reside in the frontal lobes. However, what I decided to do was to grow up to be a neuroscientist and to try to figure out how science and spirit intersected. So here I am, all this time later, and that's exactly what we're going to do this morning, to take a look at the energy of healing, the psychology of healing, some of the molecules of healing, and how they all come together. So if we could have the lights off and the slides on, please, Andy. This is a painting, of the Russian visionary Nicholas Roerich. And Roerich called this the mother of the world. And I've always loved this painting. You can see that the mother sits with her palms outstretched. And those palms are outstretched in the traditional posture of blessing. If you look at any tradition, the energy comes from the hands, the palms of the hands, also the soles of the feet. If you've been to India, if you've taken the darshan of one of the great ones, of course you're not supposed to sit with your feet toward the master, because that's a point of great energy. And we're just beginning now to understand in Western medicine what some of this energy of healing is actually about. Moving toward a new medicine, a medicine in which that caduceus has two aspects, and I would say that we could look at those aspects in that caduceus in a number of ways. We could look at it as the material body and the energy body. We could look at it as allopathic medicine and complementary medicine. We could look at it as a union of the masculine and feminine with each person and within our world system. I think what's happened so far, things always proceed in a balance, but if everything was always balanced all the time, there would be no progress. There has to be both darkness and light. There has to be both male and female. In terms of medicine, we've come to a tremendous and very important kind of male aspect of medicine, the development of technology, the understanding of the pathophysiology of disease, which is absolutely vital. But now I think some of the feminine aspect of medicine is arising, and we're coming to this new balance. These paintings, by the way, of Alex Grey. He's an artist from the States. He's written a very beautiful book called Sacred Mirror. Introduction to that is by Ken Wilber. And these paintings are about 10 feet tall. Alex has to see the energy body. And you can see here he's got painted the acupuncture meridians and the chakra lines. I had the chance to go to China in 1986 with a group from Harvard Medical School that was led by Dr. David Eisenberg. And David was featured on the Bill Moyer special, Healing the Mind, which I believe that some of you saw here. And he took Moyers on a tour of China, much like he took us on, to study the Qigong masters. And we were interested in studying both external and internal Qigong and looking at the way that Chinese medicine integrated energy medicine and healing with allopathic Western medicine. I think they have an ideal to which the rest of us might aspire, because they really do know how to use both. And it's their thought that in acute illness, Western allopathic medicine is best. But for most chronic illnesses, which have to do with the disbalance of that qi energy, then Chinese medicine is best. And the way these things are used is really very, very beautiful to watch. One of the demonstrations we saw, external qi healing. In other words, the practitioner would meditate, get the qi moving in herself or in himself, be a channel for a life force energy beyond the self, and then pass that to others. So external qi healing is much like Chinese therapeutic touch. I would say it was the same sort of thing. We had a Chinese surgeon who went into a room with us. He turned off the light. He did his meditation exercises. Then he picked a fluorescent bulb, a bare fluorescent bulb, and the whole room lighted up. So that was a wonderful demonstration. And he said that he does this with patients all the time, and that healing actually starts when he shakes their hand, that whether they know it or not, he begins to pass that energy. And this is not considered peculiar. Many people hold this idea. Certainly go to the parks in China in the morning and you'll see hundreds, sometimes thousands of people practicing Tai Chi. There are now some studies being done with Harvard Medical School, and in these studies they're looking at cancer treatment, Western allopathic cancer treatment, but in combination with Qigong, with the use of massage, with the use of herbs, the use of internal and external qi healing. See if that process can really be accelerated. Many years ago, it was back in 1978, I was doing one of the postdocs at Harvard Medical School. It was the postdoc in mind-body medicine. I was working with a cardiologist from the States who I've worked with on and for almost 20 years, Dr. Herbert Benson. He's very well known for his work on quantifying meditation physiologically and finding out that meditation brings forth what he calls an integrated hypothalamic response, relaxation response, which is the physiological antagonist of the body's fight-or-flight response. And we had been looking for different forms of meditation to study to say, are they all physiologically equivalent? What kinds of measurements can we make on meditation? Can we measure that qi energy in some way? And if not directly, can we measure some byproduct of the energy? So one day I happened to be reading Alexandra David Neal's fascinating book called Magic and Mystery in Tibet. And there were two practices in there I found most interesting. One was called Long Pa, and that was the way that the Tibetans used to train for long-distance running. Very different from the way that we train in the West, because their training was to dig a pit 10 feet deep, sit in the bottom of it and meditate, and when you could levitate it out, then you were a long-distance runner. Now, the way that the other form of meditation was called Tummo Yoga, G-T-U-M-O. Tumma in Tibetan means fierce woman. It's the Kundalini, it's the Shakti. It's the life force energy, which in most systems is believed to be feminine energy, that Qi. So in Tummo is a way of bringing the energy up through the chakras in a particular way and burning away illusion, burning away attachment, so that the core self can shine through, and one can attain knowledge of one's own true nature, or in Tibetan, one's Rigpa. Now, when they did this, the byproduct of practicing Tummo yoga was great heat. So I'm reading along Magic and Mystery in Tibet. It sounds marvelous that the full moon in February, all the monks get together in a cave and they drape themselves just like this in wet sheets. And then the monk who dries the most sheets in the course of the night is considered the most adept, has created the most body heat, burned off the greatest amount of attachments. I went into Dr. Benson and said, "Oh, what a neat thing to measure. This would be so interesting. Let's see if this can be done." And then we had a very serendipitous event, divine appointment, I believe, and that was that the Dalai Lama was coming for his first trip to Harvard about a week later. And we were able to have an audience with His Holiness and ask whether there was anybody left who did Longpa. His answer was, "No, we have airplanes now, we don't need this." But he said there were plenty of people left who did Tummo yoga. And so I did not go on that trip, but Benson went with a number of Harvard scientists and actually set up measurements of the monks. You can see now they're monitoring all kinds of things, from temperature to oxygen consumption. And these guys have good concentration. They can continue to meditate throughout all this monitoring. And indeed, they liberate prodigious amounts of heat. And over the years, I found this was very interesting to take a look at the byproduct of energy production in the body. And recently, having entered midlife, I'm 50 years old now, it occurred to me that these monks work a lifetime to do what any midlife woman can do with no problem at all. And I'm beginning to think that hot flashes are a very interesting manifestation of energy, literally, and that for those of women in the audience, if just like these monks, you think about what attachments are that you'd like to get rid of and offer them up to your hot flash, you too can have the benefit of that energy. But it's interesting when we take a look at what the mechanisms are that underlie this and what the mechanisms are of healing. And I'd like to consider some of those with you. First of all, a little apology. It says that's the whole problem with science. You've got a bunch of empiricists trying to describe things of unimaginable wonder. And that's true, but it's still fun. We'll do our best. The way that we tend to think in the West of life force is really not a form of energy per se. We tend to think of energy as molecular interactions more than anything else. In the West, healing is usually compared to homeostasis, right inner balance of one sort or another. And if we take a look at what are the mechanisms of homeostasis, we're going to talk today a little bit about the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system. And it's important to recognize that all those systems of the body are in communication with one another through very remarkable molecular mechanisms. Some of you have probably heard Dr. Candace Pert lecture. And Candace is from the States, and she's the co-discoverer of the endorphins. Endorphins are one of 36 or more small informational molecules called neuropeptides. And these neuropeptides, or now actually that's a passé word, informational molecule is definitely the new word that's used for those. Those combine, they're kind of like a very quick energetic bleep that speaks between all the different systems of the body. What's interesting about the informational molecules is this, that they are correlated with emotion. And it turns out that emotions are the link between the body and the mind. That there's a part of the brain, middle part of the triune brain, the emotional brain or limbic system, that is very rich in secretory cells, which actually secrete these informational molecules directly into the cerebrospinal fluid of the ventricles and then out into the body. And literally within a millisecond of feeling any kind of emotion, every cell in your body responds to that. So it looks like there are different neuropeptide fingerprints for experiences like joy or experiences like sorrow or creativity or excitement or fear, that instantly you feel these as a felt sense, don't you? You feel the energy shift in your body with different emotions. And that energy shift, in a certain sense, is accompanied by a change in every cell mediated by informational molecules. They fit into the cell surface, into receptors. The receptors then clump and move on the cell surface. And in response to that, the nucleus of the cell will repress or activate genes that make certain proteins. So that literally, instantaneously, every cell will change due to a certain emotion and felt sense. And this is a very exciting area. But again, we tend to think of these things as molecular shifts, but of course that's a form of energy. It's chemical energy. But once again, our Western science has not related that so much to the energy body. Now, when we take a look at healing, oftentimes people say, well, homeostasis is what underlies healing, and that's true. But what usually comes before homeostasis is a healing crisis of some sort. When I chose the title, Fire in the Soul, it's actually a book title, and it came from working with very seriously ill patients. I ran a mind-body clinic at one of the Harvard Medical School teaching hospitals for about 10 years. And for most of that time, most of my patients had either AIDS or cancer. Some had stress-related diseases, but many of them were facing death, and quite a few of them were cardiac patients. And they had faced death, had near-death experiences, and come back and shared that. And I got very, very interested in the way that healing comes about, not through balance and homeostasis and meditating and making everything nice, but by stirring up the pot terribly. And that's what Fire in the Soul is about. When Bill talked last night about St. John of the Cross, that's where I got the idea of fire in the soul, because we all go through different dark nights of the soul in our life, and certainly illness is one of those times when literally, if you think about it, the day that you get a diagnosis of, God forbid, AIDS or cancer, life as you know it comes to a screeching halt. That's it. Nothing is ever the same. And you enter that period that the anthropologists talk about, the liminal phase. You've now died to who you were, and you enter the unknown. You enter that journey, and that's the dark night, because you don't know yet what you're going to be reborn as. So it is that period of darkness, that period of fear, that period of uncertainty, and also that period of tremendous divine grace. Because what I have found, both in my own life and working with many others, is that oftentimes mysticism and spiritual growth does not come about through those times when everything is peachy and homeostatic. It comes through the dark night. It comes when the ground has opened up beneath our feet and is about ready to swallow us, and we are terrified. It seems that the power of prayer is very great in those times. The power of transformation is really present. What I tried to do in Fire in the Soul is to give people a context for that, and a realization that it's much like Ilya Prigogine, the Belgian physicist, has talked about. If you're going to create something new in your own life, if a bacterial culture is going to recreate itself, if our culture is going to recreate itself, generally the first step toward that is a dark night. It's chaos and breakdown of what was, so that there can be reintegration at some higher order. And I found that because of that, meaning was most important to my patients, and that the meaning they ascribed to why they were ill was critically important about the mobilization of the healing energy. That some people, when faced with a crisis, would despair and lose hope. And those people were usually the ones who blamed themselves. It's all my fault. I'm not good enough. I created this illness with my mind. Or worse yet, people who said, I am ill because God is punishing me for my sins. And if you think about these points of view, from just the point of view of your own body energy, they don't mobilize a lot of energy. They lead toward a sense of depression, helplessness, and giving up. And there's an enormous literature, I might say, on helplessness, giving up, what it does to the immune system, which is nothing good, what it does to the cardiovascular system, which is nothing good. Basically, it pulls the plug on the life force energy. On the other hand, if people could have a context where they say, you know, what's happening to me is a crisis, but life progresses through crises. What's happening to me is a chance to remake myself on another level. I'm having a shamanic initiation. I'm an initiate into mystery. That is a very energizing thing for the body. This is a painting that a woman did who had chronic fatigue syndrome. And she was at the point where she had to give up her work. She was laying in most of the time. And she drew this picture of the meaning of her illness, which is called the shaman. And this is what she felt. She said, I am deconstructing. I am falling apart. And in the process of that, I am going to be able to give birth to myself in an entire new way. And that allows people to surrender to the experience of illness, or to surrender to whatever life experience may be difficult, in a way that invites the healing energy in. It's very interesting. The invitation for healing energy to enter the body at a spiritual and molecular way has to do with a sense of surrender, in which people feel there is a divine plan, and part of it is deconstruction. I'm going to sum up a great deal of science in just a couple of minutes. If we take a look, Andy, I think we could use to focus that a bit. If we sum up all the literature on health and healing, it's very interesting. It's not what you would expect. If you take a look at what is it that keeps people healthy, people usually hone in on health habits. You know, it's things like whether your lifestyle is sedentary, how much fat you eat, how much alcohol you drink, whether or not you smoke. Turns out that those things are important, but they're of minor importance compared to two major variables. Those two major variables are, number one, high self-esteem, and number two, good social support. It comes down to relationship. Relationship to oneself, relationship to others, relationship to a higher source. One of my very best friends in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, is a nurse and PhD researcher by the name of Janet Quinn. And Janet has done a lot of the research on therapeutic touch. Her definition of healing is very similar to mine. She says healing is right relationship. To be in right relationship with ourselves, with one another, with the earth, with the environment, with the use of resources, with the seasonal cycles, with the light and the dark cycles, with our divine source. And when you take a look at the basic research that underlies that, it really is true. Janet, by the way, has done some very interesting research on therapeutic touch, external Qigong, and the immune system. One of the experiments she did was looking at a particular index of immune function, some variety of T lymphocyte function. And she found not only that it increased in the person who was getting the therapeutic touch, but it increased in the nurse who was giving the therapeutic touch. That at an energetic level, it's an old truth that now can be demonstrated at a biological level, you receive what it is that you give. That energy moves in a circular way. If we take a look at this pyramid, please excuse me, the way that I like to define disease is isolation and separation. And to define healing is that sense of connectedness. And that occurs on these three levels, at a personal level. And the journey of healing at a personal level is one of healing from unworthiness and peeling away the various masks that we've learned to put on at some point in our life because we think that's what makes us acceptable to other people. And what we get at the end of healing is that sense of authenticity and self-esteem. Now, when I have taken a look at spontaneous healing, I've been really interested in commonalities that people have who undergo spontaneous healing. And I'd like to say a few words about that. There has been tremendous amount of research over the past 30 or 40 years on people like me who've had a spontaneous healing from a mental illness or from a physical illness. There's a very large database, by the way, that was put together by the Institute of Noetic Science, Spontaneous Remission, book on spontaneous remissions. If you take a look at stories of spontaneous healing, usually they have three things in common. And the three things that people have in common are this. Number one, a move toward authenticity and self-esteem, much as you see here. Secondly, people with spontaneous healings have a strong belief that healing is possible. And number three, they've often had a spiritual conversion experience. So let me speak to those. The sense of authenticity comes directly from that sense of fire in the soul. Oftentimes we're just too busy in this life to ask those big questions like, who am I? What is the purpose of life? Is there a part of me that goes on when the physical body dies? And what is the measure of a life well lived? And when you get ill, it's amazing how these questions come right to the forefront. No question about it. They jump right up there. And the way that people answer those questions is not just philosophical but practical. One of the most really amazing parts of my life has been the 10 years that I spent day in and day out with people who were asking these questions and saying, really, how shall I live? In the face of the fact that I understand that I am mortal, how shall I live? And I saw tremendous acts of courage on people's parts as they really clarified their values and said, what's most important? If I die tomorrow, will I have lived my purpose? What is most important? And it's not surprising to any of you I know that what people frequently said was most important to them was love. When push came to shove, that's all there was. What is sacred? What is important? It's the ability to give and to receive love. The ability to show up in the moment is one way of saying that, to be mindful, to receive the gift of life, to see the beauty of the sun that rises and the sun that sets, to feel the wind in your face, to see a flower, to allow yourself to be seen and encouraged by another person, and to see and encourage them back. And through that sense of empathy and union, to feel the presence of a third, which is larger than either one. It's a spiritual sense of what it is to love. And I saw people really rearrange their lives. And my favorite story of this was a woman who was very ill with cancer. She was a young woman in her 20s, and she'd had both breasts removed, and came to one of our groups. Maybe it was the 5th or 6th session, so people knew each other. So we used to meet, the patients would meet 8 times for 8 weeks in a 2-hour session. And she came in and she said that she was getting divorced. And at first people were furious. They thought her husband was leaving her in this terrible situation. They were ready to go hang the poor guy. And she said, no, she said, it's not him. I'm the one who's leaving. And the next question people said was, well, why? Is he beating you? And they could not imagine why she would do this. And she said, no. She said, it's just that I know I've got cancer. I don't know how long I'll live, but I know what's most important, and it's love. She said, something's gone wrong in our relationship. We don't encourage one another. We don't bring each other forth. We diminish each other. And I can't stay here, she said. for two reasons. One, she said, I feel in that diminishment that my body is diminishing, that life force energy is not moving in my body. The energy of healing is not moving because it has to be mobilized by love. And secondly, she said, I have to be with people that I can love. I cannot be here and feel that this is a life worth living. And so she left. That's authenticity, when you clarify your inner values and you change your external life to match that. And that kind of commitment often happens in people who have spontaneous remissions. The belief in possibility is really all about the mind-body connection, the placebo effect. What we believe actually manifests in our body in a most remarkable way. You just think about the fact that one study was done of women who were getting chemotherapy. And this was a trial to look at the efficacy of the chemotherapy. So half the women got placebo, and half the women who got the placebo lost their hair. See, that's the power of belief. So that's important. The third thing I want to speak to is the spiritual conversion experience, because that's such an important thing for people who often have remissions. So I had a spiritual conversion experience which I described to you in terms of my own remission. But these come in many, many different ways. And as I thought of the hundreds of different stories I might tell you, I chose this one because it also relates to something that came up last night in our discussion with Bill. And that was whether our medical profession needs to be trained more about spiritual experience and Kundalini experience. And the answer is they do, because here's one that was missed. Very interesting conversion experience. Patient of mine with Crohn's disease who had to be hospitalized from time to time to be fed with hyperalimentation when he'd get very thin, was in the hospital, and it was Christmas Eve. He was a young Catholic man, and he had a very great devotion to both Jesus and Mary. And he was sitting there on his bed talking to his social worker when his description was he felt a bolt of energy rise from the bottom of his spine. He felt his body fill with energy. And as his body filled with energy, his perception completely changed. And instead of feeling separate from things, he felt that great sense of connectedness to all things. And he felt the absolute perfection of being in the hospital at that moment with Crohn's disease. He felt the perfection of everybody being there, how perfect the drugs were on the nurse's cart, how perfect everything was, and how it all fit together. And he was having this great experience, and he tried to share it with the social worker. She was very worried, because you're not supposed to like being in the hospital on Christmas Eve with a tube in your vein. So she went to get the psychiatrist on call. That's what happened. He explains the experience, and the psychiatrist said, I'm afraid to say that you're having an organic psychosis due to an electrolyte imbalance due to the hyperalimentation, and that I'm sure we can fix this, but in the meantime, we'll just dose you up with Valium. And it was very interesting because he said no thank you. He told the psychiatrist he could always call if anything went wrong, but he'd like to just stay with the experience. Now, what was interesting, and I think what is fascinating is this: when we're questing often for mystical experience, we want to have this experience that Paul had of unity with all things, but that's only part of the mystical experience. He had the whole 9 yards, because what happened next was he would start to think of something that bothered him, and he would suddenly be there in a great state of fear. You know, the old Vedantists have always said, the mind takes the shape of whatever it dwells upon. And suddenly he would be thoroughly in fear and isolation and separation. So he would go back from that sense of connectedness to the sense of unworthiness and fear. And all night long this went back, and he said he visited all the different stations of his ego. He saw all the places where his heart was normally closed, and he would move in and out. Now the trouble was he didn't know what to do with his experience. He called me up because he thought that since I was a teacher of meditation, perhaps I would know what had happened. But it was a typical Kundalini experience, and it was something that was of very great benefit to his life. Now let me say that, number one, what people always want to know is, did his Crohn's disease instantly go into remission? And the answer is, no, it did not. However, his life moved to a totally different level because of this, and his faith moved to a completely different level. He had a very deep belief, as I said, in Catholicism, and that simply moved and opened for him in very, very beautiful ways. His Crohn's disease did not go away. And one of the things that I simply do not understand as a scientist is why there are people who have a strong belief in possibility, who make a move toward authenticity, who have a spiritual experience and their life heals but their body doesn't follow. And what I have to say is we probably never will know that. We have to leave room somewhere in the system for the sacred mystery. Let me see how I can summarize with our time short and make a few things. This is a picture by Rene Magritte. I love to sit sometimes on a rainy afternoon and look at the way that he paints human psyche. But the need of healing, of course, the way that we mobilize the energy of healing is that we do have to face ourselves. And many of us have developed ways not to do that. When I take a look, let me use this as a way to summarize everything I've said, bring us maybe to some conclusion. When I take a look at what it is to heal as a human being, all of us are like Paul, that patient. We all have different fears. We all have different parts of ourselves. We're all a little bit like people with multiple personality disorder, you know? And it's fascinating to see that. Sometimes I joke and I say that all of us here is one large cosmic case of multiple personality disorder. That's really only one of us here. And we all have we're just different faces of that divine one. But if you look from the point of healing, the point of energy, what goes on, I want to tell you a healing story of a woman by the name of Alice Hopper Epstein. She actually wrote a fabulous book called Mind, Fantasy, and Healing. And hers was the story of a, quote, spontaneous remission from a kidney cancer, which had already metastasized to her lungs, and which at the time she had it, there was no cure for it. The only available treatment after the removal of her kidney was interferon, and it was still experimental. She was willing to go for it, but she actually cured herself without the interferon. And it seemed to her that they would try a psychotherapeutic technique. Now, if you take a look at the sort of wisdom of the ages, whether you're looking at Tibetan Buddhism, or whether you're looking at Advaita Vedanta, or whether you're looking at the mystical core of Judeo-Christianity, all of them posit that there's a divine spark somewhere within us, whatever you call that, the God seed within you, or the Shekhinah, or your Rigpa, or whatever it may be, and then some constellation of the ego around that. If you take a look at, first of all, let me go back to multiple personality disorder and then back to Alice's story. You look at people with multiple personality disorder. They've been abused as children. They've had to learn to dissociate and learn to live in alternate realities. And in that alternate reality, they change. And not only do they change mentally, but they change physically. So I'll give you a typical story. A woman who was beaten as a child of 5 years old learned in her mind to go out and play on the swings when her mother came to beat her. And then she developed a personality which was anesthetic. It would come out to take the beatings, and that's very handy to be able to anesthetize your body. That personality also was different energetically from her other personalities because, number one, it could create rapid wound healing within her body. And number two, when she grew up, that personality had the power to heal by the laying on of hands. It had a way of channeling and dealing with body intelligence. And oftentimes it is trauma that gives people these particular talents and abilities. Now, oftentimes there are helping personalities and also destructive personalities, and this is true of all of us. But there was a very interesting psychiatrist by the name of Ralph Allison, and when he actually regressed people to the source of their trauma, he would always find one personality that said it didn't form during the trauma. And regardless of the person's religious persuasion, it would say things like this. It would say, I have always been with this person. I was with them before they were born into a body, and I will remain with them when their body dies. It would frequently characterize itself as a conduit for divine love and wisdom. And it would tell Allison, the therapist, the psychiatrist, what the patient needed in order to be healed. It also had the characteristics of what we know as non-local mind. And that was that if you are a therapist working with a multiple, you get in touch with this so-called inner self-helper, it will tell you what you need for healing and what's going on in your own life. And so it has that capacity of intuition, wisdom, understanding at a non-local level. And I find it fascinating that the most injured human beings, in a certain way, show us what is the capability of every person. Now let me relate this to our subject of healing and complete the circle here. These multiple personalities that a person has, each one is physiologically distinct. The story I told you, there was an anesthetic personality, a personality that could heal by the laying on of hands. Frequently you'll find that different personalities, you can find one that will have an allergy so severe that the patient would have anaphylactic shock, but in another personality there were no allergies. Or one that will need eyeglasses and switch to another personality, there will be no glasses. Now the question is, could somebody with cancer switch to a personality that had no cancer? What kind of an energetic shift are we talking about in the body that would shift us literally out of an illness? Can it exist? And my answer to that is yes, no, and maybe. I'm a very middle-of-the-road kind of person. But let me finish up with a story of Alice Epstein. She decided on a form of therapy known as psychosynthesis. There was a very brilliant psychiatrist by the name of Roberto Assagioli, a contemporary of Freud and Jung. And he had a concept of personality, almost similar to multiple personality disorder. He says, we have this inner self-helper. This is Allison's term for that part of ourselves. And Assagioli simply called it the self with the big S, the way that you would find it in Vedanta, or the way that Jung might describe it. And then he said, you've got all these other sub-personalities around you. And Alice Epstein decided that she would work very hard with this system and found a sub-personality inside of her, about 5 years old, a little girl by the name of Mickey, who was bound on self-destruction. There was such self-hatred there. And as she began to work with this sub-personality and make it realize that it was lovable and integrate it, they kept taking chest films. And every time she would make progress with this sub-personality, the chest films would begin to clear. And when she finished integrating this sub-personality, all of the metastases disappeared. And it was a very, very interesting kind of progression. This is the kind of story which interests me, and it also horrifies me. I was on a panel with Alice at one point, and I said, Alice, do you mean to say that everybody with cancer, if they can shift out of a personality that is energetically keeping their cancer alive, if they can shift into another subpersonality, are you saying that everybody could cure themselves? And her estimate was that she felt that was probably true for about 10% of all people, that the energy of the subpersonality, of the ego, of that structure was so related to what was going on hormonally, informational, molecularly, if you will, that that kind of a shift was possible. And I actually believe that, again, for some people it really is possible. And maybe if we were all as hypnotically talented as Alice was, we would be able to make that shift. But I do think that's part of the medicine of the future. And I'm going to just end by saying that there are many techniques that can help put a person in touch with their own physical energy and with the energy of the divine. And Larry Dossey talks a lot about this. I think many of you know Larry or have heard him speak about the 3 eras of medicine. The era 1, physical medicine; era 2, mind, body; era 3, medicine, really the medicine of spirit, where we take that greater spirit, non-locality of mind, the ability to heal through prayer into account. But I think that we need to be able to integrate that into medicine, and that there are ways to teach ourselves and teach patients, teach our children how to more fully use the power of the mind to mobilize that life force energy through meditation, through imagination, through techniques like lucid dreaming, which are truly, I think, the mind-body medicine of the future. And that in so doing, we're really entering a new period of medicine and a new understanding of the body. Thank you.
Well, Joan, that was just wonderful. I enjoyed it very much indeed, and I enjoyed it particularly because of the breadth of it. Being a scientist, one always has to come back again to how are we going to formulate this knowledge? How are we going to categorize it and look at it? And I don't want the answer, this is a very male question. What's the next step? Because we understand brain function quite well at the moment. Certainly we've got most of the major systems mapped. How are we going to map this new knowledge onto it?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? How are we going to map that new knowledge? There are some things I think that we will never fully map, Peter. For example, the understanding of body energy. We can say, well, it may have to do, for example, with what goes on in the right temporal lobe of the brain. That's a very interesting thing to look at. What is the circuit board of mysticism? One of the things that has fascinated me is I've had a lot of patients, for example, with temporal lobe epilepsy, and they see both the angels and the devils. They've got both sides of teraphobic fear, and on the other hand, experiences of light, unity, oneness. I had one patient with temporal lobe epilepsy that every time she'd have an attack, she'd feel the Kundalini energy rise, and she would contort spontaneously into yoga postures that she could not move into any other way. And so we can see that, if somebody like Wilder Penfield could probably give you the exact location of those neurons in her temporal lobe that were doing that. But what can we say other than like learning to dissect a television set? Say, well, it's nice to know where all the parts are, but the real action is, what difference does it make to her life if she's got these discharges? What does it mean to be in connection with angels and devils? What does it do to her creativity? What does it do to her relationships? How can we help her make the most of these kinds of states? And so that, to me, is the interesting practical thing. We can map it out, but how can we help people understand their experience in a way that will allow them to be maximally creative and maximally loving through them?
Thank you very much. So we really need a new science then, where all these values can be incorporated. Let's go across to David in the Art Centre. David, how are you doing?
Hi, Peter. Yes, we're here.
Let's take a question from you to begin with, if we may.
Yes, we have somebody in the front row here. Microphone's on the way.
Joan, thank you very much indeed for your talk. I have been struck by many things that you've said this morning. One in particular about the concept of subpersonalities and the concept of shifting subpersonalities in someone who may have cancer. What I heard you saying is that the person actually worked with the subpersonality and became more loving. So from what I'm hearing, it's an integration of that subpersonality and not actually just a shift from an uncomfortable place to somewhere better. So it sounds to me like an integration to actually come to that place of self in a more comfortable way. My name's Barbara King and I work in a similar field.
Barbara, thank you. I enjoyed your comments last night as well. And that's precisely what it is, was that sense of integration. You know, when Alice, I think you'd be fascinated by her book. Once again, it's called Mind, Fantasy, and Healing. She at first thought that she could just get rid of this little part of herself, this little pesty part. And it became very clear that you never rid yourself of any of your parts, that each of those little parts that was wounded act very much to create a pearl in a certain way, and that there is the wisdom of every wound. And it is in the integration of the traumatic parts of life and the garnering of the wisdom that the true energy of healing really comes about, so that you get something more rather than less. It's not like you were going back to a state where this didn't happen, but you were actually brought to a higher state through the resolution and integration of it.
Thank you very much. Is that okay? Probably
Thank you.
Right, we'll have one from here. Then I think it's the gentleman there was first in the second row. I think that the time is getting on, so no, please give him the mic. Over there, gentleman in the red sweater. And I think what we'll do, if we can keep our answers very quick and short, and our questions short, then maybe we could have another question from the Arts Centre and another question from here. Let's try it and see how it goes.
My name is Tadeusz de Gromoboy. I spoke before. I agree with everything you said. I would like to add something and hear your comment on it. In my last book, or the first book on this subject, I started it by saying, suspend all your doubts and obstructions and believe. And this is the point. And be prepared to sacrifice for this belief what you know has to be sacrificed. And it will happen. I think you implied in your talk, that all belief also may entail a lot of sacrifice. I feel that it is both physical sacrifice, mental sacrifice, any form of sacrifice, but it is often a very necessary part in the recuperation of a person. I say that I was killed, I was told I'd never walk and think. I do walk and think.
Okay, I think we'll have to stop the question there.
Well, I think this is true, that it has to do with dying to who you are to become something else. And I don't think when we start any of this process we have any idea what that dying is going to entail. That's why we need friends who can walk with us as the sacrifices happen.
Okay, David, let's have one from you.
Yes. Who would like to ask a question here?
How about my husband?
Is there anyone?
Have you got anybody, David?
Not apparently.
Okay, right, we have one from here. And then perhaps you would like to ask the Arts Centre question.
Yes, I'm Dr. Wong. I'm practicing both conventional medicine as well as spiritual medicine. I'm very fascinating about your speech. At the same time, I'm very much enjoy it. I want to ask you a practical point. We know that as a medical profession, and then all causes of cancer, I'm interested especially in cancer, because few of my cancer patients already cured. So I just wonder, because causing of cancer is a many factor, isn't it? So number one is connected. I will do as quick as possible. Number one, hereditary. Number two, physiological. Number three, become environmental factors. These factors are affecting us, both physical and then the spiritual trauma, mental trauma. Any trauma can trigger on this cancer level. So and now we got up to the date of our cancer recently we can cure the cancer of leukemia through the umbilical cord blood. So we know that in the medical profession, sometime after we qualify many years, we forgot. There are 3 levels. Number 1 is embryology. Through the embryology, we human being form through the two cell. And then through that embryology, we got a human being form. That is the number 1.
We're just short of time.
Short
so
of,
if
okay.
you could focus the question very
as quick as
precisely.
possible. And second one is I'm talking about healing power. Because of healing power through the embryology, so we're now doing umbilical cord. And second one is healing power through the physiology. When we got a wound, we call healing. Third one, healing according to our spiritual one. So all these healing process going in together. So I just want to ask, my question is, how will you deal with in the cancer different stages, number 1? And also in America, does it started about through the totem potential of embryological cord cell? Have they started? Or in England now we are already now on its way taking the umbilical cord on the baby?
Yes, well, my answer is I don't know. I understand that definitely taking the cells from the umbilical cord is going to be much better than waiting for donors. I don't know how many times or whether that's been done yet in the States. One of the things that I think is most important about cancer is this, that we have to pay attention to all the effects, including environmental. And I'd like to make one comment here for those of us who'd like to be socially active, that in the United States at least, the incidence of breast cancer was 1 in 20 women in 1960. It was 1 in 8 women in 1993. It's about the same with prostate cancer in men, so there's an epidemic in both. And I think we are all well aware of the fact that this epidemic is due to xenoestrogens, organochlorine pesticide residues that fit into estrogen receptors on the cell. And that unless we do something to clean up the environment, we're going to have a great deal of trouble. And in my own conceptualization of this, I would say that those xenoestrogens are initiators of cancer, but that trauma, the sense of separation, however that happens, are promoters of that within the body, and that we have to work at both levels. On the emotional health of people, on the ability of love to promote changes, and the ability of practicality to stop the pollution.
Thank you for that. Very quick comment from Mr. Borishenko.
Dr. Kaltrider.
Dr. Kaltrider, sorry.
Mentioned there's no neurological or neuroscientific model for some of what we've been talking about, and that I don't believe is true. I think that Roger Sperry's model of emergent properties and downward causation, which is mostly in his own mind, not his discovery of the right brain, left brain, he considered that a minor work as compared to emergent causation and downward causation as explaining the way in which the brain can indeed organize higher levels and then literally restructure even the molecular level. That's a very well thought of theories within neurophysiology, neuroscience in general. So it's not quite as drab as it may appear.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Joan. A wonderful talk which spanned really the whole of psychoneuroimmunology and the relationship of spirit to mind. There are 1 or 2 points that I'd just like to echo. The first one is the very important point which you made, and that is that complementary medicine, spiritual medicine has its place. And if you have an acute heart attack, you probably don't send for a meditation teacher, you send for the paramedics. And Larry Dossey has addressed this point, and he calls it New Age guilt. And so those of us who get a viral infection and collapse into bed don't actually have to feel guilty. We haven't been good. We probably just got a viral infection and collapsed into bed. The next point is that you brought up, and I think is a wonderful one, is the way that energy is circular. And the work from HeartMath, I think, is very important on that. And that is that 5 minutes of compassionate love held in the heart changes the IgG, which is an autoimmune protein, level in the mouth for 6 hours. And so there is an enormous effect of what we actually do and feel and its relationship to body chemistry. And of course, also the secularity of the energy that you said. And the final point, which I'd like to hear more about, is the whole question of non-locality of mind and interconnectedness. And of course, our science, because it's a Galilean science, sees us all as separate, and we act on objective external world, when we all know, of course, that it's not that at all, that it's all a psychological internal world. So thank you very much indeed. It was a wonderful talk, and I'm so glad that you could come over and be with us.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you all doing? Good? So, I thought we would start our workshop then with trying to decide together what you would like to do and how best to spend our hour and a half. Here's what I thought we might do, and then I'm going to open it to you and we can add and subtract things. I have just a few slides, actually 3 of them, that I'd like to show you. Many of you know very well the work of Larry Dossey, who's one of my closest friends and colleagues. And what he's done is to really put together a framework in which we can understand healing, physical healing, emotional healing, spiritual healing, and put those all together. And I had hoped to be able to get that far this morning, but because of the problems with the videotape, I lost a little time and I didn't get to that. And I think it would help just to finish that piece. Is that sounding all right? And then I thought that we would, after that, really just work together on some shared experiences, in particular types of meditation that I have found very helpful. And what I'll do when the time comes is I'm going to give you a menu of types of meditation practices that we might do. And that menu will include meditation practices. If you'd like, we could talk a little bit about the yoga of the dream state, Tibetan dream yoga and lucid dreaming, and the use of that in healing and spiritual awakening. We could take it in many different directions. But let me find out now, how many of you have some kind of a meditation practice, even if it's quite irregular? Okay. How many of you are pretty new to meditation? Okay. Good. So that means that we can work perhaps with some more advanced techniques. And if we do that, one thing that I would very much like to do is work with some Tibetan Buddhist meditation techniques, particularly the one that I found very, very useful in my own prayer practice and in working with patients is what's called the meditation of giving and receiving, Tonglen, the universal compassion. How many of you know this form of meditation and use it? Tonglen? Okay, so for most of you, it's fairly new. And I'm going to put that on the menu, and you can certainly make a choice. But is that something that sounds of interest to many of you? Okay, and then what I want to do is also to save a fairly large amount of time for dialogue. So let's get started. Then we'll have time for some dialogue. Then we'll go into meditation and meditation practices, and possibly a little bit on the practice of Tibetan dream yoga. So since we're doing that, I'd like to start with the 12-syllable mantra. Anybody who knows it, just to join in, because we're going to invoke that particular aspect of the divine in our work today. And it's an invocation of Padmasambhava. Om Miya Om Benza Om Guru Okay. From that, we'll go directly to the slides. So if you could put those on, Andy. If you don't know the work of Larry Dossey, his work is very much worth reading. I would have to say that in the States, of all the people there doing work in mind-body medicine, I think his work is the very best. Larry is extremely well-grounded in spirituality, in medicine, and a very practical person. He's been for a long time, since its inception in 1992, part of the Office of Alternative Medicine. He edits an excellent journal on alternative medicine, and he has written 5 books that are published and a 6th book that's coming out in a few months, specifically on more aspects of prayer and healing. And it's that work that I'd like to discuss with you today. His 3rd book, which was called Recovering the Soul, A Scientific and Spiritual Search, was probably my favorite book of all of his books. And I've enjoyed each and every one of them, but I found that this was quite remarkable. And he did a very nice review in that book of some of the work of Einstein, some of the work of Schrodinger, who's known for the work on wave equations, and really related that in an excellent way to medicine. And in that book, he has put forth a way of understanding medicine that I think is very useful. Whoops, we seem to be missing one. Okay. He talks about 3 eras or time frames in our understanding of medicine. And here he's talking just about modern medicine over the last 100 years or so. And he said the first part of our understanding of this modern medicine is mechanical in nature. It's an understanding of the pathophysiology of disease, of the ways in which the body actually functions, what homeostasis is about. And of course, it's been absolutely wonderful. We have learned a great deal from this understanding of allopathic medicine. But in and of itself, it's not enough. What's happening in the United States now, and I can't speak for England, I don't know your situation here, but people are getting fed up with a strictly allopathic approach. And there's a very big and growing interest in alternative medicine. This morning I mentioned Dr. David Eisenberg in terms of his work with the Qigong masters in China. He's also written an article that was very influential in the States. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And it looked in the calendar year 1990 at Americans' use of alternative medicine, of 16 different sorts of alternative medicine, ranging from acupuncture and massage to chiropractic and meditation and about everything in between. And they found that 35% of all Americans had used alternative medicine in that year. If they did it again, I'm sure it would be a much larger percentage now. But furthermore, more people had visited an alternative practitioner than had visited a family practice physician. So that was a real wake-up call for medicine. Furthermore, economically, $13.8 billion was spent in that year on alternative medicine. And what that has done is to get hospitals very interested in alternative medicine from an economic point of view. So Deepak Chopra, for example, has got a mind-body medical institute at Sharp Hospital in San Diego. And after he opened up that clinic, somebody happened to send me the annual report from Sharp Hospital. And the CEO had cited David Eisenberg's study and said, we're opening a mind-body clinic because there's $13.8 billion out there. And we think we should have a piece of the action. So it's funny. In a way, it's a grassroots movement that's been co-opted because of the economics as much as anything else by general medical practice. So people often ask me, is medicine changing? And I would say, yes, maybe not for the reasons we might think, but it's changing because there are really now in the States 2 tracks of medicine, allopathic or Era 1 medicine, and all the other alternatives that are coming up alongside of it. What's very clear from studies in the States is that very few people, a very small minority, use alternative medicine as an alternative to allopathy. It's almost always used in a complementary manner. And in fact, I much prefer the term complementary medicine, because I feel that if we use it correctly, you're going to see that we'll use ERA 1, 2, and 3 medicine all together. And that it is not that one is always preferable to the other, depending on what the condition of the person is. Sometimes one might be better than the other, but often we need to use them all together. The problem with oftentimes, I'm just trying to focus this. Andy, can you give me a hand with the focus? Thank you. This is actually carefully calculated to induce an altered state. I'll be fine in a minute. The problem of this, of course, with ERA 1 medicine is that it's great for some things, but about 90% of the reasons why people do visit family practice physicians are for things that have some kind of a mind-body connection, stress-related disorders, for example. And these ERA 1 medicine doesn't treat at all. So for the majority of things, it's simply not enough. My husband, some of you met him, Dr. Kurt Kaltreiter. People keep trying to call the poor thing Mr. Borisenko. Please don't do that. But Kurt gave me about a year ago 2 wonderful poems of D.H. Lawrence. And one of them concerns ERA 1 medicine and what is really happening in the States in terms of its being viewed as not enough. It's a very short poem D.H. Lawrence wrote called The Scientific Doctor. I went to the scientific doctor, and he wanted to reduce me to the level of a thing. So I said good morning and left him. End of poem. Short poem. And that is what's happening. Now, he wrote a second poem called Healing. I did have these out of order. There we go to ERA 2. Larry Dawsey talks about ERA 2 medicine as mind-body medicine. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about mind-body medicine. But we're also going to talk about ERA 3 medicine. This is very confusing. Somewhere around here we have ERA 3 medicine. There it is, which is non-local mind and medicine. And the second poem of D.H. Lawrence, I think, encompasses ERA 2 or mind-body medicine and ERA 3, which is really spirituality in medicine. And it goes like this. I'm not a mechanism, an assembly of various parts. And it's not because the mechanism is working wrongly that I am ill. I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul, to the deep emotional self. And wounds to the soul take a long, long time to heal. Only time can help, and patience, and a certain difficult repentance, long, difficult repentance, a realization of life's mistake, and a freeing oneself from the endless repetition of that mistake which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. A freeing oneself from the endless repetition of that mistake which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. Now that's an interesting poem, isn't it? I love to recite it because every time I recite it, I feel it a little bit more deeply somewhere in my body. I feel some new facet of what that mistake really is. But in a certain sense, I think the mistake can be brought down to the different faces of isolation in the way that we isolate ourselves from one another, from the divine source, from the earth, from ourselves. And the way scientifically we isolate material matter from spirit. And era 3 medicine, era 2 and 3, really speak to healing that mistake, freeing ourselves from that mistake which our society has indeed chosen to sanctify. When Larry talks about era 3 medicine, what he's talking about is this. In era 2 medicine, what we're saying is my mind can affect my body and your mind can affect your body through very elegant mechanisms that are well worked out. In era 3 medicine, what we're saying is your mind can affect my body and my mind can affect your body. Now, that's a totally different thing. And as Larry Dossey always says, that's both good news and bad news, right? Because it's about blessing and it's about cursing. And there's some very interesting data that pertains to that, and I'll be very brief about it. But one study that has fascinated me was done by Marilyn Schlitz at the Mind Science Foundation in Texas. What she did was to get a group of volunteers, and here was the experiment. One person was put in a room and attached to a biofeedback machine. A volunteer in a distant room was asked to think either relaxing or tension-producing thoughts and send it to the one on biofeedback. And at a level that was statistically significant, untrained volunteers could project their thoughts and create relaxation or tension in somebody in a distant room. That's eerie, isn't it? But it's very interesting. Another study of this sort I found fascinating because I know often when I drive in the car, I'll feel compelled to turn and look in back of me because I'm sure that someone in the next car is staring at me. Have you ever noticed that? Going down the street, well, this was a staring experiment. They had a person in a room with a video monitor on them, and, you know, the monitor was being shown in a distant room. The picture was being shown in a distant room. And in that room, they either had somebody staring at the image or not. And at a level of over 90% accuracy, the person could tell whether or not they were being stared at. So you wonder, the old sort of wisdom that when your ears burn, somebody's talking about you may in fact have a case. There are also a number of very interesting studies on prayer. In fact, there are 150 studies on prayer that have been done, and the majority of those, not all, but the majority of them show some positive effect of prayer. And this is when we eliminate will and belief. This morning we talked about spontaneous remission in terms of a person's own intention, will and belief. And yet healings often happen when a person doesn't even know that they're being prayed for. And there's been a couple of very important double-blind studies where the patient and the staff in a hospital do not know which patients are being prayed for. And nonetheless, the group that is prayed for does better on whatever is being measured. And there are more studies like this that have now been funded by the Office of Alternative Medicine. And if you're interested in looking at a good review of those studies, I'd buy Dossey's latest book, Healing Words, the subtitle being The Power of Prayer and the Practice of Medicine. So this is interesting. Nature of mind. You know, what is the nature of mind? It's the age-old question. Is mind something that is an emergent function or property of brain? Or is the brain more like a television receiver that exists in a field of vibration known as mind? And the only way that you can understand Era 3 medicine is to look at the latter point of view, that consciousness or mind is much greater than the brain, that the brain resides in the mind and not the opposite way around. Now, this all becomes very interesting when we begin to meld it together into figuring out what in fact can we do with the power of the mind to heal. What do we know scientifically? What can be added through things like prayer? What is the nature of meditation? What in fact are we going to do? And so before we bridge into that, this was just the last little piece that I wanted to give you to say that I think we're at this point where we can cleverly use both era 1, 2, and 3 medicine and use them all together and have a much more complete understanding and system of medicine. So at this point, I'd like to hear your comments, questions, and then we'll do some practical exercises. Yes. Yes, right there. Yes.
You were talking about consciousness, either being an emergent property of the brain or the other way around, like A being to the B set to receive. Isn't it possible that there is the consciousness, which I believe is the energy there, the mind, the one mind that Barry Dawson speaks of, but that also what is happening with the evolution, if you like, in the human brain is an emerging of being able to tune in to this consciousness, and so that it's a sort of two-way process. We somehow have to tune in. Sorry. Was that all right?
Yes, that's better.
I've got the microphone now and I've finished. But
You know, it's very interesting when we talk about, is there in fact a paradigm shift? Are more people able to tune into that one mind? I'm of 2 points of view here. And the first is that there does seem to be a generalized awakening that's going on. If you look at statistics, again, I know only statistics for the United States, not for England, but 1 in 20 people in the United States has had a near-death experience. This is a rather large number. And of those, a certain subset comes back with unusual properties. I would say something, I can't remember precisely, but maybe a 20th of those, it's a small but significant percentage, come back as electrical sensitives. They can't wear watches because they stop them. Their computer goes on the blink. They walk under streetlights and they go out. And oftentimes these people have come back with very great intuitive capabilities, the ability to heal by the laying on of hands. Something's happening. Something has changed in the wiring. And what that shows me is that we are capable of being rewired, like in the blink of an eye. That's very interesting, isn't it? The species can be rewired. And yet I think there are certain people or groups of people on this planet who don't need to be rewired because they never lost the wiring in the first place. My husband, Kurt, is part Nanticoke Indian, and I've learned a lot about indigenous peoples from him. And it's interesting because they never underwent a fall. They never lost consciousness of that one mind. To them, the trees are alive, the rocks are alive, the Great Spirit is everywhere. And so they have always tuned in exactly that way. And it may be then that it's not that we're evolving as a species at all, that we have always had that potential, but that those of us who have lost it through the conditioning of our particular culture are being reawakened by some of us being rewired. But who knows? Yes.
Just wait. Sorry. I'll bring you the
Here comes the microphone.
Especially for you, Julian.
Just a comment about health, healing, and death. Perhaps it's true to say that one can die in a healthy way. I mean, we are mortal. We all die. Life is a universally fatal condition. But yet some people, I think it's right to say, die more healthily than others. I speak to some extent from experience of a work in a hospice.
Yes.
But healing doesn't always occur, and perhaps it doesn't need always to occur, and indeed, in a sense, should not occur.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And there's a part of the mind-body connection that I always call the mind-body Gestapo. And that is people who will equate 100% physical health with psycho-spiritual healing. And of course, this is actually a ridiculous point of view. Because number one, if you look at all of the saints and mystics, number one, they're all dead. Number two, they died from exactly what the rest of us die from. They die from cancer. They die from heart disease. You know, Ramana Maharshi had a cancer of the bone. Bernadette Soubirous, who saw the Virgin at Lourdes, died in her early 30s, either of tuberculosis of the bone or cancer of the bone. And if you say, why? She didn't pray enough. She's not exalted enough, that she should have been perfect. It's ridiculous. And it's another manifestation of the kind of thought that says more is better, that somehow or other we're supposed to live. You read all these books about not only longevity but beauty, that if we just did everything right, we'd last until 107 in our bodies with no wrinkles, no cellulite either one, and that anything short of that means that we failed in some way. And once again, to an indigenous culture, that would be nonsensical. Because if we tend in our cultures, Western cultures, to view life as linear, I often think we view it as walking a pirate plank, and at some point we're going to fall off at the end. But in indigenous cultures, life is seen as a circle. And it doesn't matter if the circle is complete an hour after a child's birth, or when you're 20, or when you're 40, or when you're 110. Because alpha always meets omega, and there's no such thing as an unfinished life. So that a lot of our problem, I think, in Western culture has to do indeed with the denial of death. You know, so many good books, Ernst Becker, so many people have talked about that. And because of that, two things have come up. One, in the mind-body area, there's this whole interesting business about New Age guilt. People absolutely blaming themselves if they get sick in the first place, and then if all of their efforts to heal don't cure them physically. That's why you've made such an important remark, because people often heal in the process of dying. Whether or not their body is cured is secondary. The most important thing is your life healed? Are you, in fact, once again in right relationship with yourself, with the earth, with your loved ones, with God, with all of those things? And oftentimes it's the very nearness of death that does that. The other thing I think that's very important here is to make sure that our position when we think about mind-body healing doesn't get egocentric. In other words, how are we to know if we have an illness, and if in fact that illness is not curable, that in some way or another our illness is not for someone else? Why do we think it's only for us if we're all interconnected? So many times I've heard this story when I've sat with dying people who'll have a vision and they'll come back. Many times I have heard something from them that they have a recognition that their illness, in fact, was something that they took on for the purpose of serving somebody else, that somebody else changed, somebody else came to a new conclusion, somebody else grew. So I feel that that's also important, to recognize the interconnectedness. And to bring it all down to the curing of one person is much too narcissistic a point of view. So, yes.
In the actual healing process, I was told once by a significant healer, it depends on the clarity of your vision, the duration of time you spent on it, and your motive, of course. But mainly how close and how long you can keep the focus, and how clear you can generate it, and on your motive, in other words, strength of your belief. And these are the significant factors in absent healing, or even, and then the humbleness of the person, that means the egolessness.
Yes.
How little ego there is. That is just the observation.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And I think that also, if I were to add something to that observation, the quality of the person's love, I think, is enormously important. There's a group of researchers in the United States called the Spindrift Foundation that studies prayer and distant healing. And what they really talk about in terms of prayer and healing is to have a wholly quantitative, a consciousness of the holiness of whatever it is in your mind to be healed. And when you see the sacredness in another person, you see their holiness, you see and feel the worth and the beauty and the uniqueness of this person. That really is the energy of healing and what they would call non-directed prayer. That's what brings the best in the system to fruition. So I think that's very important. A pure and holy qualitative consciousness of whoever or whatever is being healed. Go ahead. She had a question over here with the yellow badge.
We talk about prayer and also about absent healing. Would you differentiate between the two, or would you say they were both the same thing, or aspects?
I would really say they were aspects of the same thing, prayer and distant healing. Before I forget this train of thought, I had one more thing I wanted to say about death and dying, because this is so important. The hospice movement is so important, and it's such a privilege, isn't it, to be part of that? Such an incredible privilege. There was a study done in the United States that came out recently, this January, in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it looked at the horrendous state of death and dying in the United States, which is much worse than the state of things in England. In the United States, we have no Brompton's cocktail with morphine in it, because it's felt that, after all, why would you give morphine to a dying person? They could become an addict, right? So it turns out that almost 1/2 of people in the United States die in significant pain, which I think is thoroughly useless and horrifying and lacking in dignity and humanity. 1/3 of all people who've had a loved one die end up in financial ruin with all of their resources used up, because 25% of the healthcare dollars in the United States go for not healthcare, but prolonging life when it shouldn't be prolonged in the last 3 months of life. So we have pain and financial ruin. To add to that, 30% of people die comatose and on a ventilator, having been kept alive beyond the point where it's reasonable to be kept alive. So it's a very sad state. And now, due to this report, people are saying, I guess there really needs to be a humanization of the dying process. And I think many of you are aware of the work of Therese Schroeder-Schieker. When you came into my talk this morning, that very beautiful angelic voice and harp was Therese Schroeder-Schieker, who for many years in the States has had something called the Chalice of Repose Project, which is a hospice care project for the dying. And she is a medieval musicologist, or a musicologist, I should say, who specializes in medieval music. And the album I was playing for you was called Rosa Mystica. And it is all music that is sacred to the divine feminine. Rosa Mystica is a piece of old Christian liturgical music. Comes from the idea that when the world mother has an apparition as Mary, she often has an apron filled with roses. So mystical rose is that. And she sings this music to people as they pass over. And she's written a lot in nursing journals. And when people hear this type of music, and it's all plain chant music, it's not rhythmic. She says rhythmic music binds the soul to the body. This kind of music helps the soul to separate. But she gets significant pain relief, so that she's got very good data that people get somewhere between 5 and 6 hours of pain relief when they have this type of music. So she's actually got a program at St. Patrick's Hospital, which is in Missoula, Montana, and 20 people a year study harp, study voice, study metaphysics, study hospice work, study what it is to be with the dying, and graduate from that program. And they're now seeding hospitals and hospices across the United States. But if any of you are interested in that, you can write to her. I'll write it down. And get her articles, because they're beautiful, and also get her music. Sure, I can do that. Now, I don't know the zip code in Missoula, Montana, but it's a small place, and I'm sure it'll get there. Okay. This morning I talked about a book called Mind, Fantasy, and Healing, and that was Alice Epstein. Okay, other questions?
It's Herta, Laurie.
Hi, Herta.
Hello. I think I say for all of us, thank you, and for a very profound presentation each time. That's been absolutely enriching and informing. I just wanted to add something around what you have been speaking about. At a very early age of 8, I found I could go into altered states of consciousness and was aware that the divine was present in everything, that everything was sacred. A blade of grass or a stone, everything was holy. And I wondered why people weren't aware of that, and why religion didn't teach us that, and where could I find people who understood or perceived that. And the other thing that happened was telepathy and being in touch on wave bands of color and frequencies of people's thoughts and feelings, being able to either see them or perceive them telepathically. And I became aware that we have in space a field, an electrodynamic field that actually conducts our thoughts, our feelings, our prayers. And it made me realize at a very early age we're separate from no one. Yes. It is only the physical body that gives us intimations of separation. But that on every other plane of reality, and they are planes of reality, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, we are all connected and of one consciousness. And that was wonderful, because I lived away from every member of my family in the war. We were all separated, but I knew I was with them, and that has helped me all through my life. There's the bad side of it, that you pick up people's thoughts that you don't want to know about. But that unitive field that we are connected with, I actually do think we have moments of this relationship and are aware of it, but we don't know how to define it. And it's happening to us all the time, but we don't define it, and we're not aware enough or conscious enough. And our equipment actually can develop to be in touch consciously. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Hertha. And I think that you're absolutely right. If people were more aware of this state, to just simply to notice it when it happened, that would be enough for those pathways to continue to develop. And that's one of the reasons why our educational system for children really needs so much change, because they're so often in this state, but because it isn't paid attention to and it isn't reinforced, it's very easy to enter into the general state of stress, craziness, and forgetting in which most of us live in this culture. So to be able to identify that in and of itself would be a tremendous tool for remembering. Yes. We're going to take about 2 more questions, I think, and then we'll continue on.
Thank you. Thanks very much for introducing a little bit more about the Era 3 stuff from Larry Dossey.
You're welcome, Stephen.
That emphasis on spirituality and connection with a cosmic soul is difficult enough for many of us to get in terms of our own lives. And you have to work pretty hard on some sort of understanding to commit yourself to keep the focus. But how does this apply then to the rest of the world? We're talking about all of us as individuals. And what we see around us in the world, we don't even have to look very far, in our own societies, is violence and hatred. Yes. And it seems insoluble. And it's certainly negative. How does all this apply to that?
First of all, I'm fascinated by the same thing. Give that microphone back to Stephen, because I'd like to know what your thinking is. What do you think?
Oh, God. That was a bit cruel.
That's something that all of us think about, isn't it? You know, here we sit, the privileged few in this room, thinking of this. What about it? And what about the violent society we live in? She wants to answer. You want to get off the hook? We've got lots of people. I'd really like to get off the hook. Yes. That's all right. This lady in the blue in the second row, her hand shot right up. Right here.
I'd like to ask another question.
Oh, unfair.
I'm reminded. Is it working? I'm reminded of something you said in your lecture. There was a regression and a personality that said, "I've been before they were even before this woman was even born," and that reminded me of the work of Roger Woolger and the past life therapy, and this relates to the violence. I met a young man somewhere once, ages ago, who told me his dreams, and they were indicating that his violent behavior was not only his, but came well back into the 16th century, I think. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. Thank you.
Well, I have several things to say. And that is, first of all, that it's very important to look at the roots of violence at every level. That one of the roots of violence, I always like to start with the physical and move up. I'm a practical person. I want to tell you about a little study about violence and polychlorinated biphenyls. This is fascinating. You know, they're everywhere. They're part of electrical conductors. If you burn your toaster and you have that funny smell, it's PCBs. A researcher at the State University of New York fed Great Lakes fish, which just happened to be high in PCB. She fed these fish to pregnant rats in the last third of their pregnancy. The offspring were born with lesions in their limbic systems and were violent, antisocial, and aggressive. Now, that's bad enough because they weren't fed just, somebody gives them a bunch of chemicals. They ate fish that people eat with the same chemicals. Worse yet, the offspring of those violent rats whose mothers had eaten the Great Lakes fish were even more violent with more lesions in their limbic system, even without further exposure to PCBs. When I take a look at what's happened in the United States in one lifetime, I grew up a child of the 50s and 60s. We didn't have violence in the States the way that we do now. And I begin to wonder, we can't blame it all on society per se, that the pollutants in our environment are destroying, I would say, the emotional centers of human beings, and that we really have to look at that. It's not an option. This is an absolute necessity. Secondly, then we do have to look at the social roots of things, at the way that children grow up, at the way that children are schooled. And all of those things are important. And the third part of it is, at a spiritual level, I think it's important to pray for people. And I have a little difference of opinion with the Dalai Lama over this. I asked him once what he thought of the prayer studies in terms of praying at a distance for other people, doing good for violence in the world or illness or whatever it was, and he laughed and he said, He said, ordinary people shouldn't bother. He said, the power of their samadhi is not great enough to be able to concentrate and do this. And he says, that's what bodhisattvas are for. And, I said I'd send him the studies, and actually I haven't. It reminds me that I should, to send those studies, because I do think that each one of us can make a difference, that our prayers make a difference, and that we need to work at that level, but we need also to be socially active and do what we can. And sometimes the amount of violence, the amount of distress in this world becomes so overwhelming, I think, that people just get numbed out. You just don't know what to do. But it's not up to any one of us to solve the whole problem. We can't. We can work on ourselves from that same point of view that if there's really only one of us here, any work we do to heal ourselves is going to heal the whole. And then we can help people one at a time. That's the magic of Mother Teresa, who said once, how did I ever plan, she said, to pick up 40,000 dying people off the street? She said, I didn't. You couldn't. You'd be overwhelmed. I started with one person. And she said that's the formula. That's how you create change in the world, one by one by one. So we simply do what we can without allowing ourselves the luxury, which we cannot afford, of feeling overwhelmed by the whole. If every person does just one thing, it'll be a help. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Oliver Knowles, Alistair Hardy Trust. I would agree with you that we do seem to suppress psychic powers in children. Cassandra Easton, who has written several books on this subject, has shown that many children have psychic powers, but our culture is against the development of this as they grow up. On the other hand, I don't know whether you know Richard Buck's Cosmic Consciousness, which was written, he's an American doctor who wrote back as far back as 1870 and had a great influence on William James, amongst others. Now, Buck's hypothesis is that far from losing psychic powers, Homo sapiens is gradually developing additional powers. He points out that we acquired the power of speech, we acquired the ability to see colors. Many people now have mediumistic and psychic powers, and of course this is in line with Teilhard de Chardin's theory of cosmogenesis and the noosphere. And I think on the longer term view is perhaps rather more encouraging.
Thank you. There's quite a wonderful woman. I don't know if you know her work. Her name is Carolyn Myss, which is spelled M-Y-S-S. And Carolyn is one of these fascinating people who had, I don't remember if it was a near-death experience or some kind of trauma to her head or what it was, but one day she simply developed quite a remarkable capacity, and that is she's the best medical intuitive that I've ever met. She's done a lot of work with Norman Shealy, and she is correct 95% of the time when she does an intuitive diagnosis. What's interesting about her, by the way, is she always says, I'm not a human CAT scan. You want a CAT scan, go to a machine. You want to know what's going on emotionally and what's stuck in each chakra, I will tell you. What's interesting to me about Carolyn is that she is the most interesting thinker I've ever met, with really tremendously new and exciting things to say about the evolution of the species, the evolution of human capacity and potential. And it is her thesis that we really are undergoing an evolutionary shift at this point in our capacity. And she says the shift is so great that we are evolving out of being Homo sapiens into what she calls being Homo noeticus. And I think that's a lovely way to put it. I think at this point we should go on. If we're going to do some meditation and talk about these things. Thank you. All right, let's take a bit of a vote in what direction to go in. How many of you would be interested in doing any part? We have so little time, but perhaps 10 or 15 minutes looking at lucid dreaming, Tibetan dream yoga. Okay, there's a general interest. How many of you would be interested? Let me tell you a little bit about Tun Glen, and we'll see, maybe we can combine some of it. I have to see what comes to me here. Tun Glen is part of the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition. And what it is, in that tradition, it's a tradition of transformation, which is why I like it. In that they say everything, of course, is made of energy. And your negative thoughts have a great deal of energy in them, don't they? I mean, boy, the power of concentration when you were bummed out is absolutely amazing. That's when the powers are greatest, right? And so they say what Tun Glen is a teaching in how to transform negativity, to take the inherent energy of negativity and turn it back into light. And in the true Buddhist tradition, it's done first for yourself, because it's felt if you cannot do it for yourself, there's nothing there for others. And then it is done for other people. And if you were doing it in the real Buddhist tradition, you would be doing it for all beings on all 7 levels of existence. But usually, in the abbreviated form, you do it for yourself, you do it for loved ones. You do it for people that you're in conflict with, because that energy of conflict is a wonderful thing to free for both people and for the earth. You do it for troubled places in the world, and you do it for the earth itself. You can do it for dead loved ones who have departed. You can do it in any way that you would like. But I find that to be a pretty useful practice. And let me see, how many of you would be interested in learning that particular practice? Okay. All right, let's see what we can do if we combine a little bit of Tibetan Dream Yoga and a little bit of Tonglen, okay? With any meditation practice, first of all, what I find is that I'm not very interested in them unless they're very practical. And by that I mean, if a meditation is just something that I was going to sit and do for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 minutes or an hour a day, then it might be interesting, but not as interesting as it would be if it carried over into the rest of my life and changed the way that I perceived and interacted in my life and used my energy. And that's what's nifty about both Tonglen and lucid dreaming, because they change the way that you are in life. What I like about most of the Tibetan Buddhist meditations is that you're trained to do them with eyes open. If you're doing the basic Tibetan Buddhist mindfulness meditation, Shamatha Vipassana, it's done with eyes open because you spend your life with your eyes open, and there's better carryover. And so I'm going to teach you these things and suggest that you can use them all the time in your daily life. I'm often using Tonglen when I'm watching the television. Now, this is very interesting, because what happens when you watch a newsreel and you've just seen 20 people being blown up, or you're just watching a film clip on Bosnia, and there is a mother leaning over a son the same age as your son, and your heart breaks. What do we mostly do? We end up carrying that energy, don't we? And it can really weigh you down, and it can really bum you out and get you depressed. And so the idea is, aha, energy to transform. This is the moment for Tonglen. And so with your eyes open, you do the energetic transformation for the people who are suffering, and then it also alleviates your own suffering. It is an energetic transformation. As I talk about it, I just want you to know what it is. It's a transformation of darkness into light. In the traditional, if you were doing it the absolute traditional way, you would be, say you're doing it for yourself, you would be imagining yourself and imagining your heart is made of light. The sun within your heart always being shining. Except that in front of your heart would be dark clouds. And the Tibetans would say that those clouds would be made of greasy black smoke, as yucky as what is coming from the bones of a burning body. I found that most Westerners don't like that image a whole lot because you have to breathe that smoke in. So I found that what seems to work quite well is to imagine the smoke as dark clouds. And so it's an energetic transformation where you'll see the suffering around your own heart in a moment or around somebody else's heart as dark smoke. And you imagine that you would breathe it into the sun in your own heart, where that smoke, of course, would instantly vaporize, making more energy. And then you breathe the increased light back into the heart of the other person, and you fill them with light. And of course you get what you receive, because through taking in and transforming the darkness, the light within you grows and becomes brighter. And then you breathe that light into another person. And what you will find is that there is actually a circulation of light. Now let me tell you a little bit about how I learned Tonglen, because this brings us into lucid dreaming. I learned Tonglen twice. I learned it from a Tibetan Buddhist Lama But when I learned it from the Lama, I realized that I'd been doing it for 4 or 5 years because I'd learned it first in a lucid dream state. So first of all, let's talk about lucid dreaming. How do you know that you are not dreaming right now? Okay. All right. So that's cheating. You already know. Those of you who don't know what lucid dreaming is like, how could you be sure right now that you weren't dreaming? Okay, if you pinch yourself in a dream, you know what will happen? It'll hurt. That this was not going to be a reliable indication. Anybody else? How could you be sure that this is not a dream? Of course, if I was a Tibetan Lama, I'd tell you it is a dream, right? It is a dream. Somebody once asked Ramakrishna, what's the difference between this life and a dream? He says, this life appears to last longer. That's it. However, how do you know this is not a regular night dream? Yes. That's right. That's true. So that this world tends to be stable, whereas the dream world is inherently unstable. But of course, what happens in an unstable dream? You can fabulate or make up reasons why it's unstable so that you don't tend to pick up the fact that it's somewhat peculiar that a red camel has just flown overhead, right? Now, I can tell you for sure 3 ways to make sure that this is not a dream. Number 1, and if you get to know me well, you'll see that I do this often. I landed, okay? This place has gravity. If we're having a lucid dream, we'd take off, right? We'd float, we'd fly. That's it, because there's no gravity in the dream world. Number 2, if you pick up something, this is a lovely poem by a 14th century Hindu mystic, Lal Ded. She says, the soul like the moon is new and always new again. Now, if this was a dream and I looked away from this card and I tried to read it again, it wouldn't exist in the same way, right? It would. Have you ever tried that? Tried that dream sign? Yeah, and what will happen if you pick up a piece of writing like this, it'll mutate into hieroglyphics, or you'll look back and it will have become a badger skin, or something truly bizarre. And you'll say to yourself, aha, I must be dreaming, because ordinarily in this world I'd pick it up and it would say, the soul like the moon is new and always new again. So that's the second thing, to pick up something and see if it mutates. The third is, in a dream, I could walk through this, okay? Because I would be existing in another, more subtle body. I can't walk through it now. So one of those 3 things will always tell you. And the key to learning to wake up in a dream, and I'll tell you in a moment why you would want to do this, is to continue in waking life to ask yourself that question, am I dreaming? Because when you are dreaming, you will tend to think about just the things that you tend to think about in this life. So eventually, sooner or later, tonight or tomorrow night or next week, you'll remember to ask yourself, in a dream, am I dreaming? You'll go like this, you'll float, and you'll say, my God, I'm dreaming. And when that happens, everything's different, isn't it? You wake up in the dream. What's it like for you when you wake up in the dream? And it is another level of awakeness, isn't it? It's very interesting.
Yes, I have these dreams, and I have
yes.
Meant to me.
Yeah, and there are these different levels of lucid dreaming. At the most lucid level of lucidity, you are aware of existing at least 2 levels of consciousness at once. Oftentimes, you can be aware of more than 2 levels. You're aware of existing on several levels at once. colors are enormously bright. You have a sense of the energy in your body and the felt sense of the energy in your body, which is remarkable. So it's a wonderful state to do healing in. If something is wrong with you physically, you're so awake and so tuned in to that imaginal realm that that is the time that you can really do exceptional healing work. It's also a time, it's been used a lot by therapists for people confronting their fear. For example, you have a terrible fear of public speaking, most common fear. In the lucid state, because you know you're dreaming, you don't have any fear. And suddenly you're free to do anything. So you construct an audience, you give a lecture, and there is actually a reprogramming of the mind and nervous system. And the next time you go to give a speech, when you're not dreaming, in this state, you're not dreaming, are you? Are you dreaming? Are you sure? No, not dreaming. In any case, many people will find that's it, that their fear of public speaking is over. So it's quite remarkable, one's capacity to do that, to make progress on all levels in the lucid dream state. You only have some control over your dreaming. A lot of people feel like, oh my, it takes all the fun out of it. You have control over your dreams. You don't. God has control over your dreams. But you're able to interact in a more conscious way. If you want to read more about this, I recommend highly a book by Stephen LaBerge. He's head of the Stanford University Dream Laboratory. And he's written 2 books. One is called Lucid Dreaming. And the second one is called Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming. And he has literally 200 or 300 induction techniques to learn how to incubate lucid dreams. And it's simply a skill. Some of you, because we've discussed lucid dreaming today, will have beginner's luck. Tonight you'll go back and have a dream. You'll remember to test your state, or as you say, you'll notice an inconsistency. Suddenly you're talking to your mother and part of you says, my God, she died 20 years ago. And you'll simply awaken in the dream state from noting the inconsistency. For some of you, it'll take a while longer for that to happen. But virtually anybody can cultivate lucid dreaming. Now, a word about it, so we know it has good psychological and physical applications in this world. Why do the Tibetan Buddhists do it? The Tibetan Buddhists do it because they say, you know, when you die, first you go to the clear light, but then you go to the Bardo states. And all of the unresolved beliefs and stuff in your mind begins to play out in a form of projections, which can show up as a variety of very nasty states, being pulled apart by wrathful deities and other things. But if you recognize that as a dream state, a state of your own mind, you can awaken within the dream state and become one with the clear light. So in a certain sense, what we're talking about is awakening. That when you learn to awaken in the dream state, you become more awake right here and now in this dream that we call life. And then if the Tibetans are correct, you can awaken from a Bardo state and attain realization. I think I have a Kabir poem somewhere that may bear on that. I often think of this. I love this. Kabir was another one of these Islamic mystics. He was what, 14th century? Is that about right? 13th, 14th? Kabir says, friend, hope for the guest while you are alive. He calls God the guest. Hope for the guest while you are alive. Jump into experience while you are alive. Think and think while you are alive. What you call salvation belongs to the time before death. If you don't break your ropes while you're alive, do you really think that ghosts are going to do it afterwards? What is found now is found then. The idea that the soul will join with the ecstatic just because the body is rotten, that's all fantasy. If you find nothing now, you'll simply end up with an apartment in the city of death. If you make love with the divine now, in the next life, you'll have the face of satisfied desire. So, that whole idea is to learn to wake up now, jump into experience now. That's why one would practice lucid dreaming. And then you're not dependent on ghosts either to break the ropes on the other side, but you have a technique that can carry it through. Now, let me link lucid dreaming and Ton Glen and say, by the way, you want to remember to test your state. Am I dreaming or not? Make a little mark. D for dreaming. As you're walking around today, every time you take a look at your hand, you test your state. You pick something up, right on film. You look away. Uh-oh, higamus pigamus, I must be dreaming. And then you say to yourself, next time I am dreaming, I will remember to notice that I'm dreaming. And then plan something to do, because it's very interesting. You're going to awaken in this dream world. My suggestion to you is to stabilize the dream world first. Be a visitor from Mars. Look around. See everything. See how it thinks. See how you think. See how you feel. Look at the colors of things. But make a plan. And one plan is you might just plunk yourself down wherever you are once you've taken stock of where you are and meditate. See what happens. That can be a very interesting experience. For a long time, what I would do is I would rise to the light, because I was greedy. I always want light experiences. God put a certain end to that. In one lucid dream, I was all excited. There I was, I'm rising to the light. And do you know what happened? My head got stuck in the clouds. And said, there seems to be cosmic justice here. Need to come back down to ground. So you only have partial control, but make a plan. Now, sometimes you'll be able to carry out your plan in the lucid state. Sometimes God has another plan, and you will find that you are interacting with another plan. So let me tell you a story, and this will lead us into Ton Glen. There was a period in my life when I was trying to forgive somebody, but having a lot of trouble. And this, of course, they say it's always that you teach what you need to learn. And one of the things that we taught at the Mind Body Clinic that occupied an awful lot of our time was forgiveness. Because if you think about what keeps you out of the present moment, and that is the moment where healing can occur. It always occurs in the present moment. What keeps you out of the present is preoccupation with the past and the future. And the biggest type of preoccupation is the hatred of self or others, regrets or resentments. So we spent a lot of time dealing with that. And I knew that forgiveness was a very good thing because it sets the forgiver free. It has nothing to do with condoning somebody else's nasty behavior. It has only to do with you and not being a prisoner. So I knew this, and yet there was somebody who'd made my life quite intolerably miserable, so I thought, for about a decade. And I was just peeved, absolutely peeved. So I did everything that I could. I went to a therapist for several years about this, made her quite wealthy, twice a week for some period of time. Then I reconstructed his life history, trying to imagine what terrible things could have happened to him to make him such a jerk. And this, as you could see, did not work very well, but I tried. I did lots of forgiveness meditations, lots and lots of them. But you know what? I used to dream of him every night, terrible dreams, tortured dreams. So I knew I'm not free. This is not working. And one night, after the dreams were particularly tortured and terrible, I woke up and I said, "This is it, God. I truly can't stand it anymore. I'm at the end of my rope." And I think prayers that come from your deepest emotional self, when you really mean it, and when you truly say, as if in 12-step programs, I really cannot do this myself. I have no control over how I hate this person. And I surrender to you. Only a force greater than myself can free me. And so I prayed in that way, and I prayed for a healing dream. And of course, you think about back to the Asclepian temples. The healing dream is a very old and powerful form of divine intervention. And so what I did was I went back to sleep, and in the first dream I had 2 Tibetan Buddhist lamas came, and they taught me a mantra for peace of mind. And it was a lovely mantra, and I enjoyed the dream, and I woke up and I said, "Thank you, God, that was wonderful, but I don't feel the shift in my body yet. It wasn't quite enough. Let's try it again." So I go to sleep, I have another dream, and this is the dream. In the dream, I'm in New York City, and you can tell it's a spiritual dream because I'm wearing an orange terry cloth robe. I love the unconscious. The unconscious is so wonderful. So there I am in the orange terry cloth robe. And of course you'd think this inconsistency, if you were really paying attention, would wake you up, because normally I'm not the type to wander around the streets in my bathrobe. But of course I was dreaming, and I didn't pick up that inconsistency. But here's where I did. I was suddenly being chased down the street, and I couldn't run. It was like my feet were stuck in molasses. And that's when I said, aha, usually I can run. I must be dreaming. And then I awakened in the dream. It's just like that, isn't it? Just that minute, like bingo. Suddenly you're in 2 states of consciousness. You're fully awake, and you're part of this movie, which is going on. So in the movie, in the dream state here, I am being chased down the street, and I know where I have to go. And the fastest way in the dream state, of course, is to fly where you're going. So I just get up and I fly to an apartment. And I walk into the apartment, and in it is the member of a teenage gang, a New York inner city gang, who's obviously going to kill me, intent on murder. But of course I'm lucid, and there's no fear in the lucid state. There's only deep understanding. And so I look at him, and suddenly this quite remarkable thing happens. This light comes out of my heart, out of my eyes, into his eyes and into his heart. And suddenly we're caught in this incredible light, this incredible flow of compassion, out of the eyes into the heart, out of the eyes into the heart. And the light is coming both from within my heart and beyond me. So it's very clear. It's the light that's both immanent and transcendent, all happening at once. And then, in the midst of the light, he has a life review. It's just like a near-death experience, except I'm in the dream in the position of the being of light, who's seeing all of his life with infinite mercy and compassion. And I see what's gone on and the terrible things that have happened in absolute detail. And there's nothing but incredible compassion and understanding of the perfection of the way in which it is unfolding, and an absolute faith that his soul is going to grow through this, and a knowledge of how it all fits together. And in the dream, I'm still aware of why I'm having this dream. I know I've asked for this dream. It's a dream of forgiveness. And so I'm monitoring my body at the same time, and I could feel the shift, the felt shift. And at the end of this life review sequence, the rest of the gang breaks into the place, and they stop, and they all emanate light, and they all say, something extraordinarily holy has happened here because hatred has been transformed to love. And at that moment I said, thanks God, that's the dream I was waiting for. This is it. And then I just turned over and went back to sleep. So that's an example of what you can do in the lucid state. And what I began to understand is that love could transform negativity. And I began to practice that and feel that with other people, to feel somehow or another something pulling from their heart into mine, and the giving back of light. And then when I learned Tonglen 3 or 4 years later, I realized that was the energetic pattern that came through that lucid state. So that God talks to us in dreams, God answers our prayers in dreams, and we can awaken through the dream state. So it's like other forms of meditation. It's not for everybody, and it's not for every period in your life. Lucid dreaming takes work, and I do it in periods. Sometimes I really practice it, And to practice it, you've got to journal your dreams every morning, because you won't remember a lucid dream if you don't remember your regular dreams. And so you really have to work with it. And I do that for periods, and at other times I pay no attention at all. I don't remember any dreams. So I go in and out. And you do that with different forms of meditation, perhaps, at different times. Yes? If you don't remember your dreams, number one, you are dreaming. You have 5 periods of rapid eye movement sleep every night. The first one comes after about 90 minutes of sleep, but it's short. It's about 10 minutes. Toward morning, your REM period goes on for about 90 minutes, and that's when you seem to dream those epic dreams. And everybody dreams. In order to remember your dreams, it's most important to have a journal by your bed, and also when you wake up, to lie absolutely still. You're secreting a hormone called norepinephrine when you dream, which keeps you paralyzed so that you don't act out what you're doing. And what happens is that as soon as you move, the chemical milieu changes. The norepinephrine is gone. And dreams are retained as something called state-dependent memory. And that is, it is much easier to recall the dream if you're in the same state, which is paralyzed. So if you stay still, and before you move, you try to catch an image, try to catch the tail of a dream, and then allow yourself to go with it. And the fastest way to do this is go through the storyline and see if you can give the dream a catchy title, you know, like Frog Drops from the Sky or whatever it was. Because oftentimes, in the time it takes to turn over and write the dream in your journal, you will forget it. So if you can keep a piece of it by keeping a title, you'll do that. And it's just a discipline. If you keep doing that and keep doing that, soon you will develop dream recall. Okay, what I'd like to do is teach you Tonglen. And then if we don't have a moment. My goodness, I thought we had till 4:30. We have till 4:15, so we just have time to do Tonglen. Could I have a tape on, please, which will be Daniel Kobialka, Timeless Motion. So, could you please stand and take a little stretch before we meditate? And Andy, I think we could turn that down just a tad. Oh, that's good. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have time to do a little Tai Chi, a little yoga? So do it where you are, just with awareness. Breathe in and reach for the sky, and with awareness exhale. And feel the energy move earth to sky, sky to earth. And then come on and have a seat. And just begin by allowing your eyes to close. And feel the way that your body rises and falls with the breath. Drawing the life force in to the belly. Feeling the breath rise through your heart to your forehead. As you breathe out, feeling the body settle as the breath moves out of forehead, chest and belly. You're like a vessel that fills from bottom to top, filling with life force, belly, chest, forehead, emptying chest, forehead and belly. filling with breath, chi, ruach, pneuma spiritus. As we did this morning, imagine a great star of light above your head. The light of the Divine One, the Ein Sof, the mystery, the infinite. And allow that light to cascade over you in waves of love. Take the light in through the top of your head and let it wash through you the way that a river washes through the sand at its bottom, cleaning you, refreshing you, scrubbing the edges of your heart, revealing the light, the sun that has ever been the truth of who you really are. And allow the sun within your heart to shine, to weave a web of beauty and joy together from the light from above. And we'll begin now doing Tun Glen for ourselves. Imagining yourself just as you are today, dressed as you are. Bring yourself to mind in as much detail as you can. Imagining your hair, your eyes, your clothing, and feeling your own body energy. Sensing both the light in your imagined heart and any darkness that surrounds it. What are those things that keep you out of touch with the beauty of who you really are? Whatever those things are, attitudes or habits or physical characteristics, imagine them as a dark cloud around your heart. To do Tun Glen now, breathe in that dark cloud into the light within your heart and feel it instantly vaporize so the sun within your heart gets even brighter. And breathe that sunlight back into your imagined self. On the in-breath, breathing in darkness, transforming it in your heart, and breathe it out. Breathe it back through your heart, and breathe it back through your eyes. Looking at your imagined self with the eyes of compassion. Breathing in darkness and breathing back light. And there may be a time now where the darkness is gone and you simply breathe back light to light, filling with your own light and breathing it back to increase that light. Breathing in your heart light, breathing it back to yourself from your heart, from your eyes. Acknowledging the fullness of the light that you are. Allowing the image of yourself now to fade. And bring into consciousness the image of a loved one. In as much detail as you can, imagining the hair, the face, the eyes, the clothing, the energy of this loved one, as if they were sitting directly in front of you. Your heart reaching out in empathy to feel the energy of this person, to sense both the great light within them and the dark clouds that often obscure that light. And practice Tonglen for them now, breathing in the dark clouds and feeling them vaporize in your heart, and breathing back light to them, heart to heart, and from your heart through your eyes. Heal them with a gaze of love. Doing the best you can to breathe in the darkness, transform it, and breathe back the light. The more darkness you breathe in, the brighter your light becomes. And if you can see clearly now the light within their heart, exchange light, breathe in their light, feel yourself. Breathe out that light, breathe it back. And two become as one, linked in light. And allow that loved one now to disappear, bringing in an image of a person that you feel some conflict with, or just a judgment about. See that person in as much detail as you can. The hair, the face, clothing, the energy of that person, sensing both the light within their heart and whatever dark clouds may be around it. And doing Tonglen for them, breathing in the dark clouds and feeling them vaporize in your heart light. Breathing back your increased light, heart to heart and through your eyes. Continuing to breathe in their darkness until you have transformed it to light. Filling them with light until only the shared light remains. You breathe in their light and breathe your light back to them. One in a circle of light. There's an area of the world to which you would like to send healing. See if you can imagine one person to be a representative of that area of the world. Maybe someone you've seen in a newspaper or magazine or on the television. One person to represent a whole country or region. Seeing them in as much detail as you can. face close, energy. Breathing in the darkness around their heart and feeling it turn into love and energy within your own heart. Breathing this back to them, heart to heart. And through the compassion of your gaze, breathing in the darkness and transforming it to light. And imagine now that you could breathe that light to the entire country or region that this person represents. And finally, imagine now that you're floating in space, that you are the sun itself, illuminating the velvety darkness, illuminating the moon and the earth. The earth so gently moving around you, an earth that is a place of duality, a place of day and night, of sickness and health, of birth and death, of two-leggeds and four-leggeds, birds that fly, fish that swim. Whatever suffering is not necessary on this planet, imagine as dark clouds hovering above the little jewel called Earth, and as the sun gently inhale the darkness from around the earth, where it instantly turns into light, and with great gentleness breathe your light back to the earth, transforming the darkness of this earth and breathing back light. Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, Holy Light. And so we dedicate the merits of this meditation to all beings, to our ancestors, to our loved ones who've passed over, to the spirit guides that help us along the way, to all beings born and unborn, to the mystery. We give thanks for our time here together. And Andy, you can begin to fade the music out. And then, whenever you're all ready, just come on back and open your eyes. So I think I will end with a poem. This one is by Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Buddhist monk. It's called Interrelationship. You are me, and I am you. Isn't it obvious that we are? You cultivate the flower in yourself so that I will be beautiful. I transform the garbage in myself so that you will not have to suffer. I support you. You support me. I am in this world to offer you peace. You are in this world to bring me joy. So if we can hold that in our hearts for one another, in our own little way, we'll help heal the world. So it's time to go. I'm sorry that I've kept you a few minutes over. If you have any questions, I'll stay up here for a while. I can answer your questions then.
John, thank you very, very much. When so many people enter this room, in spite of the beautiful weather this afternoon, I wondered, what have you done this morning to these people? Now I know. And I know that you have shared so much of your insight and knowledge. Not only that, but you've done it with gentleness, and most of all, you've done it with a great heart. And I think with that you've given us a glimpse of what medicine might look like in the 21st century. Thank you very, very much. Blessings to you, your work, and most of all to your marriage.